Kia ora, Sophie. Welcome to the podcast.
Kia ora, Noah. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you.
Excited to be here.
Hey, for those who don't know you, do you mind just giving yourself a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sophie. I'm 21 years old. I live in the beautiful Paikākariki on the Kāpiti Coast, small seaside village. If you haven't checked it out, definitely would recommend. There's a whole bunch of amazing things to do, good kai to eat, good people to catch up with. So I've grown up there and kind of lived there all my life so far. Some other fun facts about me, I guess. I helped to found and coordinate the School Strike for Climate movement in 2019. 170,000 people out on the streets. That's 3.5. You were one, yes, and your daughter as well.
No, actually, okay, funny story about all of that, which might be a bit of a dampener, but I remember it was originally planned on the 15th of March. And that was the day of my daughter's birthday, but also the day of the Christchurch terror attack. So I was there during the sort of start of it, and yeah, that was just a fucking crazy time. So now forever, that date, the 15th of March, is kind of stained, and unfortunately it's on my daughter's birthday. It's like, such a bummer.
That's such a bummer. And I remember too, like really vividly for us in organising the first strike on that date, like just how much of a kind of change that was in New Zealand's history for the worse instead of for the better, which was what we were striving for it to be.
I know. It was just crazy. Sorry, and carry on with your introduction.
And then ramping up to September though, which was kind of our pinnacle strike, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Intergenerational strike. We had business owners, we had students, teachers, grandparents, parents, like everyone really out on the street. And that was really a culmination of just how much energy there is for climate justice and standing up to protect the planet. And so it was hard to kind of rebuild from what was a really tough beginning to the movement, as you say, on March 15th, tragically. But also, obviously the lives that were lost on that day. So the school strike, a very big kind of part of, I guess, who I am and what's almost led me to be doing what I'm doing now. I'm a councillor on the Kāpiti Coast District Council. I was elected at 18 years of age as New Zealand's youngest elected member in over a decade, and honestly feel so honoured and privileged to do that mahi, like as a job, and get paid to represent my community, to advocate for my community, to advocate for the planet and the next generation. And that's kind of what I do in all facets of my life, really. And, running around and speaking at various events and working alongside young people and students and just really kind of building awareness and raising awareness about the power of their voices and the fact that these decisions that are being made don't just need to be left to the adults. In fact, they shouldn't. And that we, as kind of the next generation coming through, need to make sure that we're inserting our energy and passion and ideas into the conversation. So,
where did this amount of energy come from you? Did it come from a really young age? Were your parents also this way inclined around saving, the climate and our environment? What was that sort of aha moment for you where you started pursuing this as a bit of an activist around climate justice?
It's actually a really interesting question. So my mum works at Play Centre, so she's very passionate about like creativity and just getting out there and learning by doing, I guess you could say. And my dad is a sustainable land use consultant. So since the age of about 3 or 4, I was out planting trees alongside him for his work. And so I guess in looking back, I can really see those connections to how I was brought up and the values that they instilled in me. But funnily enough, like I've only just found out a couple of years ago that my mum was a real staunch Greenpeace activist. And that my grandma, when she was 22, was on the county council over in the UK.
True.
For her area.
In your DNA.
But they never even kind of thought to bring those things to my attention because they wanted me to find and follow my own path, which I really respect. But it's interesting to kind of better see maybe how that was influenced by the values that they held and the willingness they had to just like chase after the change that they wanted to create in the world. And I think, that's very much been instilled in me, but in a very kind of non-prescribed way. It's just been like, they've been living their values for ages and I've been observing and noticing that and I guess, learning from it. So
it's crazy what you pick up from your parents even when you're not conscious that you're picking them up. It's not till you're older where you're like, oh man, okay, seeing my mum or my dad leaving the house at 6 a.m. in the morning before work actually distilled in a mentality in myself around, getting up every day, showing up, all of that stuff. But it's not until you're older and you reflect back, you're like, oh, there are some traits that you do get from your parents. I think that's exactly that.
Yeah, and I think the same thing could be said too for the community in which I live. Like people are just so full of love and kindness for each other, and there's a real kind of spirit of like, if you have more than you need, you give back. If you see someone who's struggling, or you see, an element of the world that needs change, you just get in there and do it yourself. So I think, being in that environment and being around people who believe and think those things has been really helpful in my journey. Yeah.
Going back to the school strike for climate, which was the biggest sort of protest or demonstration of activism that I've ever seen in my entire life. It's got to be the biggest protest ever, right? In New Zealand history. The biggest
single day strike in New Zealand history. Yeah.
Can you talk us through what was that process around setting this up as a movement and rallying so many people behind one cause? How the hell did you pull something like that off?
Oh, it's a great question, and it's almost one that I wish I could answer to kind of like better encompass all of the steps to help other people do it as well, and to kind of create a playbook so that if people have things that they're passionate about, they can take it and run with it. But if I'm being completely honest, it was just a bunch of us young people who had a real kind of, I guess, fear, but also hope for the future. And we were like, holy crap, like we just have to do something. If our leaders aren't going to lead, like what's it going to take? And maybe it's going to take us, like Greta Thunberg, did in Sweden, like we saw the Pacific Climate Warriors rallying around the Pacific. What do we have here in Aotearoa, and what do we have for young people to kind of see themselves as a part of? And so we literally searched up on Google, like, how do you organise a strike? Who do you need to let know?
How good is Google?
Google is amazing. So that's literally where we started. And we also obviously kind of started through social media, which is an amazing kind of tool that we have access to, but also that can be quite destructive. But for us as a movement, it was really helpful in mobilising people. So, I vividly remember the day where there were 3 or 4 of us just from Kāpiti College, and we were like, you know what, we're just going to put the call out and see if anyone wants to jump on board in helping making this strike happen across New Zealand. Within a week or so, we had a team of 40 people from across New Zealand who we'd never met, from some places that I've never even heard of, who said, we're on board, like link us in. And just the most incredible team was formed from that initial post on social media. So I think one of the ways though that the messages really reached those people that then like meant that they just jumped on board straight away was that we really tried to keep our messaging and framing incredibly simple. Like it's about uniting behind the future that young people deserve, the future that our planet needs to ensure that, that this place is livable for the next generation. Like surely that's something that everyone can get behind. It doesn't need to be a party issue. It doesn't need to be an issue only for young people. Think about your tamariki, think about your mokopuna, think about your environment, your community, the waterways, the hills, the whenua, like really trying to keep things nice and simple. So I think that helped.
What was the sort of pivotal point where you realised that, holy shit, this is actually going to be a fucking massive demonstration of people's ability to sort of stand up and, all sort of link arms? Was there a moment when you're like, okay, this is actually getting really big?
There were a couple of moments that kind of culminated in a feeling of both like severe anxiety, going like, how the heck are we going to control this? Like off, what is going to go down? Like when you get that many people in a space, like, oh my gosh. And we're, most of our volunteers are young people. Like, how do we ensure their safety? How do we keep this all, all centered around the cause and all those considerations? One of the moments though, that was for me a real like, whoa, was 2 days before that first strike on March 15th, I got a call from the Prime Minister's office saying the Prime Minister wants to meet with you tomorrow. She wants to hold a live Q&A in a school hall. We're thinking this is going to be big and we think that we need to front foot our response to it. And I was like, damn, the Prime Minister's office is thinking that they need to step up and be answerable to us. They must be bloody worried about how many people are going to be showing up on that Prime Minister's doorstep at the Beehive in a couple of days' time. So that was huge. And then we also were contacted by quite a few media outlets saying, we want to yarn with you about what you're up to, and the pickup that those stories got, and also to be honest, the hate that we started to attract from some media outlets and people who wouldn't normally engage with kind of climate content or messaging. I think that was also for me a real big sign that like the message was getting out to everyone, like not only just the converted, or like the people who might already be on our side, or who might already, be wanting to show up to the strike, but actually it was going further and getting to a wider audience. So that was a moment where I was like, oh, okay.
When you talk about the hate, is that referring to, let's say, the boomers and the Karens? Was it reaching people like that? And what was the sort of hate that you received?
It was definitely reaching people like that. I remember there was, and her name might have even been Karen, funnily enough, but I got a message, and she was also like a kind of serial hater. She would just keep messaging me, but she was like, the only water level that's rising is the one in your brain. Like, you got to go sort yourself out.
These private messages to you?
Yeah, to me. So they would find me from the media interviews and just like go absolutely ham. And so there were a few people like that who were just, but to be honest, they're probably the anti-vaxxers of the lot, the kind of radicalists, the far right extremism people.
Totally. And if you look at any successful person ever, do you think that they've got time to be sending hate to someone else online? Like
100%. It reflects on them.
It does, totally. It's no successful person or even happy person I know is sending abusive messages, especially to young people. Like, fucking get a grip, Karen.
Right, honestly, and it did make me feel sad, but not like in myself, but just like sad about what she must be experiencing to take her anger out on someone like me, or my peers and people who were organising alongside us as well. So we had a bit of that. We also had, I remember having a couple of interviews on the media. I had one with Sean Plunkett, who
that guy.
Yeah, it was bloody intense. And after that interview, I just was literally in tears. I also didn't realise the interview was live. He had said that he just wanted to have a quick phone call to kind of ask a couple questions. And so I was like, oh yeah, and let me know if it's going to be live and if there'll be, an interview following this, or if this is the interview. No word was said. And then after I got off this interview, which was, again, I was just about crying through it, someone called me up and said, oh, you did so well on the Sean Plunkett show just now. And I was like, what? I was just on talking with Sean Plunkett live on Magic Talk Radio. And they were like, yeah.
Holy shit.
You were. And he was asking questions like, do you even understand the law that you're encouraging kids to break? And all these kind of just questions that he was obviously trying to catch me out.
In terms of getting students out of school to protest.
Yeah.
That's the sort of old school generation of thinking. It's like, mate, have you ever had something which you're, not just passionate about, but you've got a responsibility around standing up for this cause, around climate action. Hopefully that sort of thinking can just get fizzled out with time and age.
That's the goal. That's why we've got to get more young people just up in there and kind of changing the narrative and changing the approach of these, of the media, I guess, in a sense too. Well, some people within it,
So 170,000 people showed up to that protest. What were you asking the government to do? So
we had 4 pretty clear demands. The first one being to declare a climate emergency, a nationwide climate emergency, which that's happened, which is really awesome. And I was also part of the 2019 Youth Parliament that declared a climate emergency, which I think also helped to kind of spark the actual parliamentarians to go, we need to also take this on. Our second demand was to pass an ambitious Zero Carbon Act into law, which would hopefully set New Zealand up to be carbon neutral by 2040. It ended up kind of just being, I guess, pushed down the route of going with 2050 because that is in line with our international commitments. But whether it's in line with our obligations as a developed country, which has responsibility to the Pacific, I'm not so sure. So that was what we were really trying to champion. The other one, we had a demand around kind of agricultural emissions. We know that in New Zealand, agricultural emissions account for around half of our total emissions. So it's no good to just kind of find quick fixes or things around the edge to try and reduce our emissions in that sector. We really need to kind of look at it as a whole and think about how we can transform it to reduce its impact, and recognising that there are some things that some farmers are doing which are positive and steps in the right direction, but our demand was really around halving the herd and reducing stock numbers. So not just relying on technology to be the silver bullet, but actually, kind of cutting down the problem at its source. And then the fourth demand was, from memory, like 3 years ago, was around kind of climate finance in the Pacific. So loss and damage. So thinking about currently what the Pacific Islands are having to adapt to with, rising sea levels and severe weather events arriving on their doorsteps, and what that means for their culture and their homelands and their infrastructure, and how, us as a relatively well-resourced country can kind of support them with what they're facing. So,
And did the politicians, the people in power, did they listen? Or did they create any action from those demands?
It's a tricky one. And I, for a while there, was kind of feeling pretty disillusioned, because I was like, we got this many people out on the streets, and you politicians, came out to meet us, and we were just about, yelling at you, and we gave you the ideas and the mandate and everything that you could possibly need, in my view, to do these things. And they're not hard things to do. Like when we look at New Zealand's kind of budget, and when we look at how much money is being spent in other areas, and when we look at the focus on kind of social well-being, which is incredibly important, but environmental well-being has to underpin that and intersect with that. I kind of felt like, for what we had shown that we could do, that they did not step up to the play and actually kind of meet that. And
essentially making their job a lot easier, because they actually had the political mandate from having 170,000 people show up right on their doorstep, who are all with you with what what your demands are, and yet still nothing.
That's how we felt. And it was like, so how many more people do we need to have out on the streets? Does it need to be the whole of New Zealand? Like what do you need? And we can try and make that happen. But there were, in fairness, there was the Climate Emergency Declaration. The Zero Carbon Act, is now a thing, which has now produced the Emissions Reduction Plan, which is kind of like a map to get New Zealand to carbon neutrality by 2050. So there are little things, but again, they still feel quite minor in comparison to the scale of the climate crisis and what we're facing. So
there's a funny thing with like human psychology and just the way that us as people and political systems actually deal with complex and long-term challenges. When there's something very immediate, it's so easy to be reactive and respond, but because something might be 25, 50 years away, even though we are seeing the impacts now, but when it will get really dire, it's almost like us as humans don't have that ability to see that far into the future and make it such an urgent priority. What do you think that's about?
I completely agree with that, and seeing how we responded to COVID. Perfect example. We locked down. The whole messaging around that too was that we needed to stay home to save lives, and it was very clear to people that was a very personal and individual action they could take to contribute to a wider societal response to something that obviously we didn't want to take hold on us. And so, I think it's a really tricky thing to navigate, because in order for us to kind of capitalize on that response to make people see the immediate kind of damage or threat of climate change, I think people need to be far more empathetic and open their hearts and their minds and their eyes to the realities of some people in our world right now. And yes, we might be in New Zealand, and yes, a lot of us might be, pretty privileged and pretty well off. But if we think about, the realities of Indigenous communities globally, and especially those in the Pacific, if we were to imagine ourselves in their shoes, it would be immediate. We would be doing everything we can. They already are. They've contributed barely anything to the global climate crisis, and yet they've got these repercussions of it on their doorsteps. So I also feel like it's our inability to recognise the situations that other people are in, but instead we're in our own little bubbles and we're only acting on what's immediate to us. But what about our global society? What about our brothers and sisters overseas? What about our brothers and sisters in New Zealand who are struggling? And so I think part of it is that, but also part of it is, I think, the fear that young people feel is because it feels that much more immediate, because the future that we will be inheriting is the one that we're creating right now. And so if we don't do these things right now, in this moment, we'll be forced to navigate the rest of our lives through, really challenging times of potential resource scarcity, conflict, who knows, and this unstable climate. So I do think it's a challenge, but it's also a really cool opportunity to go, okay, this moment in time is super crucial. How can we band together? How can we, unite across communities and really do what's best?
How do you think about the situation where New Zealand is such a small player in this space in comparison to other countries around the world? Not saying that we shouldn't do anything, but how do you sort of internalize that with your own thinking around climate justice when thinking about a global community, when our biggest polluters are countries like, the United States, China, India? Because a lot of the sort of power and influence over this direction of climate change is sitting with probably, a handful of the top 10 biggest countries. How do you sort of think about that?
It's a good question, and I'm actually asked this by a lot of my fellow councillors sitting around the table, because they're like, Kāpiti's only a small place in New Zealand, it needs to be the biggest cities that have the responsibility. But imagine if everyone said that, then it would just be the one person at the very top, the person with the most control, the person, leading the biggest country, who we would all be pointing to and say, it's your job. And does that really uphold our integrity as people, as individuals who have a responsibility to this land and to this place, that we just kind of turf off the blame? We're all a part of bigger systems, broader systems that are perpetuating this climate damage and destruction. So for me, it's more of a moral thing. We can't just do this by the next generation. It's actually not okay. And also the other thing that's important to think of as well is if no one stands up and actually leads, then who's gonna take us forward? New Zealand could be that country, and we're pretty well placed in the global scene to actually provide an example for how positive climate justice can look. And it doesn't have to be this, super massive thing that kind of disrupts everyone's personal life, and it can be it may do, but actually for the better, for positive. And the kind of social gains that we'll see through that as well, and through making sure that the right people are involved in designing the solutions is massive. And so if no one stands up and leads, and we're all just pointing the blame, well then I just don't think we're gonna get very far, because if those people who are pointing the blame at don't even see what good looks like, then again, we're just wasting a whole lot of time. And we truly don't have time, right? We have until the end of this decade to halve our emissions. We have until the end of 2050 to be net zero, which is, kind of accounting for all of our emissions with things that reduce our impact, so planting trees. Yeah. So sequestering emissions from the atmosphere. But we don't actually have time to just keep
pointing fingers.
The blame.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, I think you summed that up really well. And that gives me, because there's always been something that I've thought. It's obviously you don't want to not do anything, but there's so much on the bigger countries to really step up as well. Because we're a little fish in a massive pond. But in saying that, you've got to pave the way. And how cool could that be if New Zealand was their country?
100%. And it can also feel quite, and I honestly, this overwhelms me often, is feeling like a real small person and voice in a far greater system, and knowing that there are 100 companies responsible for 70% of global emissions. How can I possibly have any impact in that? But I also think individuals shouldn't necessarily feel like they have to hold the entire burden of creating change in their own lives to set up our world for, a net zero emissions future. We have a massive role to play in raising our voices and in providing that really, really clear and decisive mandate to our leaders. And I think that's where collective action is really, really important. So it's like a balance between feeling the responsibility and knowing that we have it, and morally knowing that it's what we need to do right now, but also the fact that we have to do that in our own lives, but also the importance of raising our voices.
Yeah. If we go back to the school's Climate Strike for Action, if there's somebody, what do you say to a young person out there right now who's passionate about a certain cause, whether it's homelessness, climate change, youth justice, whatever that might be? What are some of your sort of key messages to them around mobilising people around the movement?
Oh, the first thing would be to just get started. Like if you have a real passion for something that you want to change, don't think that your voice can't be heard or that, you know, you're not the right person to just spark a conversation around mobilizing. Like you totally are. And if not you, then who? So just get to it. The other thing I'd say is that it's really important to kind of find your tribe and to not feel like you're in it alone. So to spark the conversation, like go for it. But when you start scaling up, make sure you've got people around you with different skill sets and different perspectives who can really like be alongside you in taking things forward. And make use of your kind of social media tools, the tools of those around you. I'm sure people are really happy to kind of mentor you through things. Ask for help, like ask questions,
that's a big one,
learn.
Eh?
Yeah. Like I'm always open to getting Instagram DM from someone who's keen to organise a social action. And if there's anyone I can link them up with, or, you know, any questions I might be able to help with, like I'm so happy to do that. I know so many people who are. So yeah, just get to it, I'd say, and don't kind of let yourself sit on that, because our world needs more people who are out there kind of chasing justice.
Totally. When I think back about the first time that we ever connected or met, I think it was through Inspiring Stories in the Future Leaders program. And I think I gave you like a cold call, and I was like, hey, we're setting up this new program in Kāpiti. And were you injured or something at the time?
Maybe. Was this Future Leaders program?
Future Leaders, the first ever one. I think if we look on our messages on Facebook, I'm like hassling you, like, have you signed up yet? Have you signed up? What has programs like that sort of taught you around getting young people with a collective sort of voice coming together?
Oh, so much. Like Inspiring Stories, the crew there, Future Leaders, you know, the festival, the youth council in Kāpiti. Like there are so many incredible networks of young people. And I guess what it's really taught me is that possibilities are entirely limitless. Like when you get people in a room who have passion and who have drive and who have, you know, connections, and most of all though, that like passion and drive, that you can quite literally go out there and do whatever. And I think the beautiful thing about that is I find kind of in like the bureaucratic spaces or like quite systemic places like council, you know, there are always reasons and excuses why things can't happen or why things need to happen at a really slow pace and why they need to be, you know, really process driven and yada, yada, yada. But when I'm in spaces and groups of young people and it just keeps me grounded in that every single time, is like, actually there can't be excuses for this kind of work. Like look at what the School Strike for Climate, right? We mobilise that many people on under a couple of $1,000s. It's That's not insane. Actually money and resource. Yes, it's important, but like it doesn't actually define what we're capable of achieving when we have the right people in a space and the right people supporting us. And I think that's what Future Leaders really showed me is young people are totally not only the future, but are quite literally the ones kind of trying to be at the forefront to create our future today. And we need to let them do that. Yeah, totally. With going into politics and your journey as a councillor at Kāpiti Coast District Council, what is that first term been like for you? Was it everything that you thought it would be, or was it totally different to what your expectations were? A bit of both. Like it was similar in the fact that it was amazing just kind of having the real mandate and opportunity to get out into the community and advocate for and on behalf of, you know, locals. And that's just, like literally the love of my life. I'm so passionate about it. And it's just, such a kind of like fire to keep going because I've got such an amazing community supporting me. So that element of it, wouldn't have changed a thing. It was exactly how I expected it to be. There's so much though within council environments that at the moment is kind of not the most conducive place to be bringing the kind of thoughts and perspectives that, you know, I'm trying to bring to the table, where things aren't siloed, where we're, you know, collaborating better with our community and also across council, where we're focused on real transformational actions in the housing space. Like council systems and processes just aren't really set up to deliver the kind of solutions at the kind of scale that they need to be. And so that's been frustrating. And the time that things take to get to even a point where you're like, cool, this is going to happen. Like, it's just, things take ages. And I kind of thought that was going to be the case, but not quite to this extent. The amount of reading we have to do, that's another thing. We've got a meeting this coming Thursday. The agenda's, over 200 pages.
Wow.
Some of our meetings have been 9-10 hours long, and you look back at what we achieved or agreed on at the meeting, and it's like, was that really the best use of that amount of time? It sometimes just feels like we're treading water.
Yeah.
Where, when we've got people living in cars, we've got like our community centres rotting. We need to build a Waikanai library to support our community there because, their library had black mould in it. So that's gone. And then we're sitting there talking about stuff that does not feel, that absolutely pales in comparison. And it just, that's the thing that annoys me, is it's like we need to get to those like big gnarly conversations and, get to just like committing money to where it's most needed. So, yeah.
Why did you choose local government over central government as that lever for change?
For me, I mean, one of the reasons is because I just love where I live. Like, I love Paikakiriki, I love Raumati, and I feel such a connection to my community. And so that was a real driver for local government for me. But also because I think I have confidence in some of the voices who we're starting to see in central government. And when I was looking at who I could vote for in the local government elections, I was like, oh gosh, I don't feel confident that any of these people whatsoever, any of the candidates, let alone the people who are going to make it onto council, are going to represent, the voice of young people, the need for climate justice, holy. And so there were a lot of people who I knew who were voting for the first time who were like, actually, local government seriously needs a shake-up. Central government, I feel like we're starting to kind of see that with people like Chloe Swarbrick and Rawiri Waititi and Debbie Ngāwera Peka from the Māori Party. And there's a few awesome Labour MPs in there too. So I kind of feel like we're starting to get that a bit more sussed, but then local government, we're lagging behind.
Yep.
I think the median age of councillors across New Zealand is something like 60 odd,
it's crazy.
It's just,
yeah.
And there are more people named John than there's some weird stat about them women or something, and globally in politics, or there's some random stat like that, but it paints a picture as to the fact that women, specifically young women and also young women of colour, are completely kind of locked out of these spaces, or not not encouraged to be in them. Yeah,
that's a massive conversation altogether. I think when I was working at Local Government New Zealand, I might have said this on the podcast that we had with Tamitha, but there was some crazy statistic where I think 94% of all elected members were over the age of 40. So only 6% were, young elected members, and you could be a young elected member at the age of, 39 or 40. No offense to people who are that age, but it's insane that that's what is considered a young person in the local government context.
That's crazy.
But also the system that's sort of created around local government, it's not really there to exist to include other people who aren't either on their pension or older demographic, whether they're like a retired business owner, because the time where, the meetings are taking place, just everything there, it's not there to consider many other demographics or personalities. That's what I've found quite sort of challenging looking into it. And you're right, you look over the bloody voting catalogue when it comes to elections, and it's just the same person saying the same thing. And it's crazy that's the tiny bit of information that you get to choose the candidates who are there to represent your community.
100%.
It's such an interesting sector, isn't it?
Yeah, and because we've got a local government election, coming up October the 8th. So if you're not, enrolled to vote, or, you haven't done your research yet, would definitely recommend doing that. But there are some people running who refuse to acknowledge that they have ties to groups like Voices for Freedom. And
that's a big thing at the moment.
They don't have to put that in their bio, but if you dig a little bit deeper and check out their social media, you can find some interesting things about what they stand for, and things that they tend to brush over on, those more kind of like formal channels where most people get their information from. So do some research. Do
you have any Voices of Freedom candidates up in the Kāpiti Coast?
Yeah, we've got two who have explicitly been named through staff, actually, who are running for community boards. One of them who is, I think he's the like media spokesperson for doctors speaking out against science or something, like a really kind of fringe thing. I don't know much about them.
Why are you a doctor? Like,
I was like, I'm not even going to search this up because I don't want it on my history. Like, I don't want to be doctors. No, that, yeah, anyway. And then this guy, Johnny Best as well, who's donated a whole bunch of money to Voices for Freedom.
Right.
And another woman who keeps saying, no, I'm not part of Voices for Freedom because they don't have members. Like, you can't be a member of Voices for Freedom. And I'm like, so what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that you tried to become one and then they wouldn't let you? What?
Yeah.
And then she refuses to answer the question whether she was at the protests. So
that doctor bit sounds interesting. That's like having a group of mechanics standing up against engineering. It's like,
that's like the foundation on which your profession was built.
I know.
Like, what?
That is crazy. So they're sort of running a bit incognito, trying to get in under the umbrella.
Incognito.
Because wasn't there a call out through their sort of networks to run and make like NZ ungovernable or something?
Yeah, I actually watched last night, which was really interesting. Would recommend watching it if you haven't already. This documentary called Fire and Fury, and it's been put together by New Zealand On Air. It's kind of like a depiction of some of the people who are kind of perpetuating this, like, making New Zealand ungovernable idea, and the Voices for Freedom people. And they're talking a lot about how local government is a space where they need people with their ideas, and to make it ungovernable, we need people who are like speaking out against, injustice and a violation of freedom. And it's really fascinating though to better understand their tactics.
Wow.
And because in the weirdest of ways, when I look at how we organise School Strike for Climate and mobilising people through using technology and social media and, Zoom calls with people who we hadn't actually met but who were keen to jump on board, a lot of those same tactics they've been using to organise these protests. And so it does pain me to think about how protest action and mobilisation might kind of be tainted by the way that they've shown themselves to behave, which is a real shame, because we have a right to peaceful protest in this country, and that should be respected. And the fact that they've now gone and taken it to this next level and potentially, stained that form of activism is a real shame.
Fuck, it was just such a crazy time. I remember walking through to get into work and just seeing the amount of like camper vans, cars. And I live just on, the old State Highway 1. And I just remember seeing, it was like something off a movie, literally thousands of cars and trucks going on and like tooting and stuff. I was like, what the hell is happening? And it didn't take long until you realize that, these people, they weren't just campaigning under the banner of freedom, but they were also campaigning, I believe anyway, around like creating anarchy. Like it was almost like they wanted to, and like, I'm sure some of the people there, they were there for the right reasons. Like, look, whether you like it or not, there's legitimate nurses, doctors, some good people who would have lost their livelihoods because they chose not to get the vaccine. But all of that sort of good and well-natured space, which I think is worthwhile to have a debate and have a civil discussion around, that all got washed out by the crazy extremists there, who were probably the majority of the people attending, who just wanted to run into Parliament and kidnap the Prime Minister and just like the most outlandish stuff you've ever heard. And when they started gathering a community there, I was like, fuck, this is not going to go away easy. This is like, they want to truly change the structure and the way that we live in New Zealand, which is pretty scary thought.
And some of that like real hateful language and ways of treating people in power, especially kind of people who make themselves quite accessible, which I'd consider the Prime Minister does. She's out and about, and people like Tamitha Paul and Josh Trillin and Porirua City, and I try and do this as well, like being accessible. You just open yourself up to that kind of criticism. I had it a lot on the campaign trail last time around, where people were like, oh, like, what do you know? You're just a young person, like, you're just a girl, you don't even pay rates, you think you're so entitled to this conversation, and like you don't know a thing. And I'm still getting that, where people are like, you're a joke, you're a waste of space, all this stuff. And you're like, where is the kindness? Like, and especially when you try and afford that to other people, like when you're actively trying to be kind in every space, but you're met with hostility from, and not from the majority in my case, but it's just sad.
Yeah. How do you deal with those sort of comments from people in your community or, you know, across the country who might be saying those sort of things to you? I think that's actually a really useful conversation probably to have quite openly, so we can raise that sort of awareness for young people who might be wanting to stand for council maybe in the future. So how, like, just speaking really transparently, how has it been for you, and what sort of toll has it taken to you as well?
It has taken a toll. Yeah, as you say, we've got to be honest about these things. And one of the biggest challenges for me has been when I've been, you know, taking the weekend to myself, or, you know, a Sunday to myself. You go out on a run and, you know, someone yells at you from the other side of the street and they're like, Sophie, can you come around to my place quickly? I need to show you this pothole that, you know, you need to put in a service request right now. And I'm like, it's a Sunday, you know, like it's in a normal job. You wouldn't you know, you wouldn't be expected to be at work. So so that element of it has taken a toll. And then I also expect myself to be on all the time, you know, like, because you think other people expect that of you. So you put that pressure on yourself, and I just have huge expectations of myself, which I think doesn't really help either. But in terms of dealing with those specific negative comments, sometimes you just have a wee cry, or you go for a walk and just listen to some music, and then you just don't give it any more energy. Like, I tend to just kind of go, okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, done.
Nice.
You know, like, it's not really worth it. But sometimes when they first come in, you're like, this is not what I need right now. I was having a good day. But it doesn't need to affect your day. But when I look at it, kind of when I take a step back and look at it, it probably has affected my perception of myself, but also my expectations on myself. Because it can be, sometimes when you see stuff like that, your brain can almost convince you that it's true, that you need to believe it, but you don't. Like, you fully do not need to believe it, because often it's just not true, or it's coming from a real place of hurt on their side. No, really good points. When you think about the sort of tall poppy syndrome mentality that we have in New Zealand, which we've got some of the worst sort of cases of it, I believe anyway. I remember being in primary school, and if somebody was good at sport, they were a try-hard. It just goes on and on and on, where we don't want other people, or there's almost like a collective mentality around some people that if someone else is doing better than them, it's not fair, or it's such a complex sort of conversation, and something which I think everybody can relate to. But under that, I think sits probably imposter syndrome. Have you ever felt that you're in the space as a councillor, you've got a crazy list of achievements behind you, but even because of that, because of your age and perhaps some of this negative comments and words coming in from external people, has that ever made you limit yourself? Oh, like every day. I'm not even joking. Every single day. There was a period, especially in the first year when I was kind of first elected, where every single time I would go and like press my little button for my microphone to be activated so I could say something, I would be trembling. My heart would be racing so fast. I would fear that people would just like, you know, burst out in laughter, that people would be like thinking in their heads, you know, what the heck is she doing here? Like, how's she sitting around the same table as us? You know, she doesn't know half the things that we know. And I kind of created this like real destructive narrative in my own head of like thinking that everyone was just going to boot me out of this place, and thinking that, I didn't deserve it for 1 second. And that took me a while. And to be honest, sometimes it still creeps in, but just feeling that way is really rough, especially when you got in there to achieve things, and then you feel like you're just being all consumed by this voice that's telling you can't, or that you shouldn't be able to because it's not a space for you. And so you're beating yourself up because you're like, no, but I'm trying. But then your head's like, no, but you shouldn't be trying because, then you're just making use of the space that isn't even yours anyway. And it's just, it's so real. Like I couldn't name the amount of times where I've felt like that, or where I've just like nerves have overcome me too, because I'm like, oh, I know that people are expecting me to, you know, I don't know, speak in this way or like say something inspiring. But it's like, I'm just a normal person, like just like all of us. There's nothing there's literally nothing special about me that brought me to this place. It's just a whole lot of things culminated, and the fact that I decided that I wanted to be in there and that I wanted to help contribute, like that's what took me there, not a whole lot of like, I don't know, things that make me who I am, whether that's like awards that people might think that, you know, is what makes us who we are. It just, I think we gotta realize that we're all just human, and I'm very much one of them.
Yeah. And it's a sort of regular conversation that I have with guests on the podcast is around imposter syndrome, and how do you beat those sort of demons in your head which are saying, no, Sophie, or no, Noah, don't do it. You're doing shit today. Like, you've got nothing positive to say. And I think what I've learned so far doing this podcast, because even talking to people like Jahan Casanada, you know,
he's amazing.
Journalist of the Year, I was fucking terrified getting him on, because he's like, his job is to interview people, and I had to interview him. I was like, oh my God, what if I fuck up? But I asked him the same question. I was like, do you suffer imposter syndrome? Because someone from the outside looking in, he's the most confident, you know, cool as ever sort of dude under pressure when he's either interviewing the Prime Minister or running massive stories. And he's like, yeah, I still get those feelings every single day. So hopefully that can give some people some sort of relief, is that it's not just you feeling that. I think Jacinda Ardern's even come out and said that she when she first became Prime Minister, still probably now, she's probably deals with like imposter syndrome. I think it's just a weird natural thing which so many of us feel.
Yeah, 100%. And that's actually really reassuring that Jihan also, because I look up to him majorly. Same. Like, he's incredibly inspiring. Yeah. And yeah, it's just, I guess we just got to help each other, support each other with the tools that kind of change that narrative, and also make sure that we're building each other up. Like, if we notice someone that's doing really amazing work, or we, you know, think of someone throughout our day and we want to, you know, send them a wee vote of confidence or support, like, do those things. It's not weird. You know, I try and do that as often as I can. Like, if someone comes into my head, or I see something that they've done, or I'm admiring their work, like, just send them a message, because you don't know how much it'll mean, or what might be going on inside their head. Totally. Despite what you might see on the outside. Yeah. Sometimes the inside's a bit different. Yeah, no, it's such a good point. I think Israel Adesanya, the UFC middleweight champion from New Zealand, he had a really good speech when he won the Halberg Sportsman of the Year, probably a couple of years ago. I'll totally butcher it, but I'll include it in one of the podcasts. He said something around like, if you win, I win, like, let's lift each other up. And he was just calling out that sort of mentality around beating people down. And you never know what a message in the day can really do to somebody. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. If you win, I win. Yeah. I'll send it to you after the podcast. Yeah, cool. Stuff like that. Before we wrap up, we'll end with some really short quick fire questions and then a bit of a quote. But before we do, I see you looking at the questions. You're not supposed to. Sorry. See, this is probably almost like an imposter syndrome thing creeping in, because I'm like, oh my gosh, no, I need to have like pre-prepared answers so people don't think I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm just making crap up on the spot. Okay. But before we wrap up, where can people stay in touch with you and your mahi, and feel free to do a plug for your campaign? Cool. So Instagram at Sophie_Handford. Facebook, you can add me on Facebook, like my personal page, Sophie Handford, or you can search up Sophie Handford for Paikakiri Hiromati, which is the ward I'm running for re-election in. I've got a website, sophiehandford.co.nz, which is mainly for my council campaign, but you can find my email address on there, or LinkedIn, or just, search me up on Google and you might find some links. Sweet. And how can people get enrolled to vote, to potentially vote for you, or if they're in other places around the country, how do they get involved? Oh, amazing question. So if you go on to vote.nz, I think is the link URL, then you can just literally make sure that you're eligible to enroll, and then go through the process. I'm pretty sure you can enroll online actually, which is pretty easy. And then head on through that process, and then on the 16th of September or shortly thereafter, you'll receive voting papers in the mail. So local government elections are postal votes. So you receive that in the mail, and then you've got until early October to fill out your forms and send your papers back in the post. So cool. Head online, to make sure you're enrolled, or to enroll if you're not, and then await your voting papers very eagerly. And when you get them, make sure to fill them out quickly and return them.
Awesome. Love it. Okay, some quick fire questions. Sophie Handford, what is the meaning of life?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Straight off the bat.
Okay. The meaning of life for me is to have fun and to find peace. Like, I'm just all about, making the most of the moment. This is all we have. Let's do everything we can, both through having fun and through building a society of peace and love for people on the planet.
Love it. Advice you wish you knew about when you were younger?
Oh, I wish I knew that not everyone has their shit together, and that it's actually okay to, be struggling with things, or to have questions, or to just not know where you're going or what you're up to, and to just learn as you go. Like, that's completely fine. Don't be afraid to be in the deep end, and just know that there will be people around you who will support you, who already are supporting you, who you might not even know, and just trust in that and trust in the process.
Love it. What does legacy mean to you?
Legacy means a lot to me. That's a whole lot of why I do the mahi that I do. When we think about, the next generation, the generations that will follow, legacy is all about, I guess, when the kind of last moments of life come for me, like knowing and having faith and trust in that I've done everything I can to make my corner of the world even a tiny bit better.
If you could change one thing in New Zealand, what would this be?
Oh, if I could change one thing in New Zealand, I would make us fossil fuel free. So I would make public transport free. I would do all of the things that would enable us to not rely on fossil fuels anymore. That would completely decarbonise Aotearoa in, let's go with 2 years.
Love it.
Yeah.
And last one, what do you believe is the main thing that is holding back young people in New Zealand?
I think it's self-belief and self-trust. I fully think it's things that are in our own heads. It's obviously also structural things, but I think we're almost reinforcing those by believing things about our place in society that don't need to be true and that shouldn't be true. So yeah, I would say let's just break down those walls inside our own head to give us that kind of thirst to break down the walls in society that are perceived to be holding us back, and that we need to break down.
Boom. Love it. Okay, cool. We'll end on a quote from Greta Thunberg. Is it Thunberg, or you pronounce it different when you said it earlier?
I don't know. I think when you say it in like a Swedish accent, it's like Greta Thunberg.
Thunberg. Okay, from Greta Thunberg.
There we go.
You say nothing in life is black or white, but that is a lie. A very dangerous lie. Either we prevent 1.5 degrees of warming or we don't. Either we avoid setting off that irreversible chain reaction beyond human control or we don't. Either we choose to go on as a civilization or we don't. That is as black or white as it gets. There are no grey areas when it comes to survival. Boom. Thank you, Sophie.
Boom. Thanks, Noah.